Hello, good day everyone. Welcome back. This is Practical Research to Quantitative Research. Okay, so last time we have discussed on the nature of inquiry and research. Inquiry is about asking question, and research is more complicated than asking question, just digging deeper. And then the characteristics of research also. The first one of that was being objective. And now this time, this is going to be the third part of this lesson, which is kinds of quantitative research designs. Okay, so kadungog mo sa kaw. Medyo baka. Okay, so what is research design? So a research design, it is an overall strategy to incorporate different aspects of the study in a coherent and logical way. So when you say overall strategy, it's just like the procedure, the kind of method being used in the research. It also becomes the blueprint. So when we say blueprint, all the structure, the house of the research, that is called the blueprint. The kind of research depends on the purpose of conducting the research and how the findings will be of use. So it depends. So what kind of research design are you gonna use? It depends on what is the purpose. Okay, so let's continue. Then we are going to start with the experimental research. Actually, the research designs are classified into two, or rather three. Two, the bigger ones: experimental research design and non-experimental. So under experimental research design, we're going to start off with this. So experimental research design, it allows the researcher to control the situation. So it's just like you're going to do an experiment. So you are going to, as a researcher, you're going to identify what happens, why, the cause and effect relationship, so between the variables. So that's experimental research design. And under experimental research design, we have pre-experimental design, and this is the simplest research design. Either a single group of participants or multiple groups are observed after some intervention or treatment presumed to cause change. So this is like when you say pre, meaning to say before experimental. So, and this is the simplest because you are going to observe the groups or participants after you have done the intervention. So to find out if there was a change in the intervention that's done. Okay, then that's the first one, pre-experimental. Then the second one is quasi-experimental design. So in this design, the researcher can collect more data either by scheduling more observations or finding more existing measures. So quasi-experimental designs involves selecting groups upon which a variable is tested without any random pre-selection process. So normally when you are conducting experiment or experimental design, there is of course the random sampling, since it is under quantitative research. However, in quasi-experimental design, you're going to select groups, but there is no any random selection process. Okay, and there are two types of quasi-experimental design. These are non-equivalent and interrupted time series design. So in non-equivalent control group, it is a between subjects design in which participants have not been randomly assigned to conditions. So they're together in a control group, and it is called non-equivalent. Okay, because there is no random random, they're not assigned randomly. And then interrupted time series design. A time series is a set of measurements taken. Okay, then true experimental design. True experiments must have a control group. So this is the third kind of under experimental research. So it is true experimental design. It has a control group, which a group of research participants that resemble the experimental group but do not receive the experimental treatment. So only the group is the same, but they don't have the experimental treatment. They don't have the intervention. The experimental group is the group of research participants who receive the experimental treatment. So there will be two, in true experimental design, there will be two groups, the control group who doesn't receive the treatment and the experimental group who receive the experimental treatment. Okay, then let's go to non-experimental design. So from the prefix non, meaning to say no. So what does it mean? The researcher observes the phenomena as they occur naturally and no external variables are introduced. So meaning to say there is no intervention here. Whatever the observer observed or that occurs naturally, that's what the observer is going to record or measure. And then it is also known as descriptive research design. So there are different kinds of, this one first. The aim of descriptive research design is to observe, describe, and document aspects of a situation as it naturally occurs, and sometimes to serve as a starting point for hypothesis generation or theory development. So meaning to say, since it's descriptive, you're just going to describe by observing and documenting the aspects of situation. And descriptive research is sometimes or usually a starting point of a hypothesis. Okay, then there are different types of descriptive research design. Let's start with the survey. The survey is used to gather information from groups of people by selecting and studying samples chosen from a population. So, of course, when there is a population, the sample, you're going to have the sample in which you're going to get the sample from that population, and they will be the ones to answer your survey. Then correlational. So when you say relational, correlational, meaning to say it dwells more on the relationship between different variables or groups of respondents under study. So it's all about relationship. Then under correlational, there are different types also. First one is bivariate correlational studies. So bi, the prefix bi means two. That means it obtains from two variables, and the term bivariate implies the two variables are correlated. Next, prediction studies. It uses correlation coefficient to show how one variable, the predictor variable, predicts another criterion variable. So example here, which high school applicants should be admitted to college. Alright, so when you say prediction, that means it's going to predict, for example, in this question, who's going to be admitted based on the predicting variables. Multiple regression prediction studies. So when you say multiple regression, it is a general statistical method for analyzing associations between two or more independent variables and a single dependent variable. Multiple regression can be employed to predict values of a particular variable based on knowledge of its association with known values of other variables, and it can be used to test scientific hypotheses about whether or to what extent certain independent variables explain variation in a dependent variable of interest. So this is still under correlational, so it's still about analyzing association between two or more independent variables and a single dependent variable. So there will be two independent variables and one single dependent variable. So in multiple regression, it is used to predict the variable based on its association with known values of other variables. But we will have a separate discussion solely for this. Okay, then ex post facto or causal comparative. So ex post facto study or after the fact research is a category of research design in which the investigation starts after the fact has occurred without interference from the researcher. So I think it's already clear that the investigation starts after the fact has occurred, and the researcher will not do anything. Since this is also descriptive, right? There's no intervention. And it substitutes for true experimental research to test hypotheses about cause and effect relationship. Okay? And then comparative. So from the word itself, comparative, you're going to compare, identify similarities and differences between social entities. So like for example, between Asians, like the Korean and the Japanese, what are their similarities and what are their differences. So like for example, you're going to compare and contrast cultures on the basis of their attributes like knowledge level, perceptions, attitudes, or whatever. Okay, and then normative. It describes the norm level of characteristics of a given behavior. For example, conducting a research on the study habits of high school students or to use the range to describe the level of their study habits. The same true is when you would to describe their academic performance. So it's norm level. That's normative. Then evaluative, it's just like when you're gonna do like an action research, if there is something that you have applied or like a new policy that has been applied or carried about, then there will be an evaluation of the effectiveness of that policy. So that's evaluative. Then this is the last, methodological. So it's the implementation of a variety of methodologies forms a critical part of achieving the goal of developing a scale match approach where data from different disciplines can be integrated. So that means methodological using of different variety of methodologies. So that's methodological. Okay, so those are the kinds of quantitative research designs. Under the there are two major kinds, which is the experimental, and the other one is the non-experimental. So under the experimental, we have the pre-experimental, quasi-experimental, and under the non-experimental or the descriptive, so there's also the correlational and methodological, and among others. Okay, so I want you to go through with the activities. Just pause the video. I will just go through this like this, and I want you to pause the video so that you can answer the activity. Just send me a message in my Messenger account. And thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys